Greetings, Earthlings. Thank you for tuning into Sunday School Bonanza, where we bring you gospel doctrine preparation of a very high caliber. If this were a precious metal, it would be platinum.
If this were a diamond, it would be triple clear.
If this were Avatar, it would be unobtainium.
Oh, man.
Very creatively named.
And yet, you folks have obtained it.
Yeah, so we're on lesson 12 this week, the gathering of my people. Bill is here. Hi, Bill.
Hi.
Nice to have you.
Thanks for having me.
We're all about a lot of history here, gathering of Israel, but more importantly, the gathering of the people in these, the latter days. It's very interesting. The Lord has gathered his people. How does that apply to pioneer times? How does this apply to us in our day?
Well, let's take it back. Let's take it way back. Let's go back to Old Testament times. You know, ever since the Lord has had a people, there has been an instruction to gather. Not all the time, but most of the time. And you see in the Old Testament, it's the story of basically Israel, when it's being good, is gathered together. And we get that beautiful language from Isaiah that is quoted later about, you know, as a hen gathereth her chickens, the Lord will gather us together. And then when they're bad, of course, they get scattered and they're all split apart. So the manual talks about a couple of different times, but Joseph Smith makes this point, and there's a great quote from him. He said, quote, "All that the prophets have written from the days of righteous Abel down to the last man that has left any testimony on record for our consideration, in speaking of the salvation of Israel in the last days, goes directly to show that it consists in the work of the gathering." That's from the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. So we, as we know from the 10th article of faith, believe in the literal gathering of Israel, and that's a big part of what we believe now. And the manual talks about two different kinds of gathering. There's spiritual gathering, which basically is all of us coming together around a common set of beliefs and the structure of the church and the gospel. There's that spiritual gathering. And then there's physical gathering, and that's happened a number of different places in the history of the church, even in our time. It started up in New York, and as soon as the church was organized in Fayette, then there were little branches of the church in kind of basically upstate New York and then in northern Pennsylvania. And then as the church got big enough, they started to talk about gathering and moving on. So it's a great thing. I mean, we all come together as a church, and it really provides a community, and that's how we worship. That's how we worship with other people. That's a crucial part of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that it's not just something that we do individually, but that we have to do it with other saints. And we'll see that play out throughout the history of the church.
Yeah, thank you for that. It is funny, too, just thinking geographically how spread out they were at that time. I mean, if you know where Fayette is, kind of like in the middle of the Finger Lakes.
Yep.
And Palmyra was a ways from there. I mean, if you've driven through there, you're talking multiple hours even to drive across this region.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how spread out they were as the saints back then as one body, but very spread out. Not a lot of unification. So the Lord, of course, knowing what he knows, knew that it's good to have the strength to have his people together. And he commands them, just 8 months after the church was organized, the Lord commanded the people to leave New York and gather in Ohio. That's Doctrine and Covenants, section 37, verse 3. Now, Ohio's a little ways away. It was about 300-odd miles, the Kirtland area, which today is around a little bit east of Cleveland, so to speak. Probably what? It's probably like an hour from Cleveland, though.
Yeah,
I've never been.
It was in what they called the Western Reserve, like the frontier.
Well, the Western Reserve comes from because that part of what is now Ohio was actually part of Connecticut originally.
Oh.
And it was called the Western Reserve because the state borders on their latitudinal lines or whatever just crossed all the way across the American continent as far as they were concerned.
Yeah.
But Pennsylvania successfully laid claim to its whole land, so it left that piece of Connecticut out there as part of Connecticut for a long time.
Really?
Yeah.
That's the Western Reserve?
That's the Western Reserve.
Huh.
So little U.S. history for you there, folks.
Yeah, that was great.
All right. So anyways, the Saints decided to gather in Ohio, and there are many purposes for this, but you instantly think of strength in numbers, the sense of community. I'm not going to lie. Even when I go to Utah sometimes today, there is sort of a sense of like peace, of feeling like I'm kind of in a comfortable place with like-minded individuals, right? Yeah. I get that. But one of the other things that we easily forget, unfortunately, is one of the main reasons is because the Lord promised to endow them with power from on high by gathering. And one of the biggest reasons why is by gathering, their numbers were potent enough that they built the Kirtland Temple. And as we know through the Kirtland Temple, we talked in another lesson before all about the restoration of priesthood, of power, but not everything was restored yet at that time.
Right.
And it was in Kirtland that many other things were restored after it was built when Joseph Smith and good old Oliver were hanging out there. The Lord appeared to them. Noah appeared, Elias, whatever you want to call it. Elias appeared to them. Elijah appeared to them, giving them the all-important
keys for doing the work for the dead. And then Moses shows up, and Moses gives them this right to gather Israel. And Moses, I sort of imagine him showing up like, "Let my people go." I mean, that was Moses' calling, was take the people of Israel out of Egypt and gather them into one place. So he was the one that came and restored this the keys of gathering to Joseph, even though kind of the gathering had commenced a little bit. I mean, they were gathering in Ohio already, but then the official keys of setting apart a place for the saints was given there.
Yeah. And of course, what about the sealing power? Was that restored at the time?
That's Elijah.
Of course.
Yeah.
So, and that's like the fullness of the gospel right there.
That's gathering in heaven.
Yeah.
Right? Everything
Everything was brought together at that point. That's huge. Without that gathering, that never could have transpired. Of course, they still had their struggles there. The people were very poor. They sacrificed a lot to come to Kirtland, to be in Kirtland. You had the whole banking fiasco.
Yeah,
with
anti-banking fiasco.
But, a lot of things went wrong. So it's funny, and then, of course, because of persecution, as much the case, we enter this transitional period when the saints were in Kirtland. But even before they were in Kirtland, Bill will talk about this, but Joseph Smith knew that Missouri was going to be in play at some point, even before they went to Kirtland.
Yeah, so he, they went out to Kirtland, but it didn't, and they continued to build. This is an interesting thing about the way that the church chose to gather, is that we would set up in a place knowing that we were going to move on, and we would finish building temples. We would finish setting up a society knowing that we were about to leave. And I'm not quite sure what lesson to derive from that about the character of our people. But we get
non-committal.
Non-committal. We'll build you a temple, but we're not staying. So that happened a number of different places, and Ohio was no exception. We show up, we build everything, and very quickly thereafter, a big part of the focus of the calls at that time, and you'll see there are a number of sections in the Doctrine and Covenants early on that are revelations calling people to go preach to the Lamanites. And so the Lamanites were understood to be Native Americans kind of living on the frontier.
And the frontier at that point was western Missouri.
Right. So, I mean, we were already in the Western Reserve in Ohio, and then Missouri was even farther west. And so they would go out, and in the process of going out there, the prophet became aware of a place around Independence, Missouri. Some saints from Colesville were sent. They basically passed straight through Ohio, and they are told to go straight down to Missouri and gather there.
And was Colesville a Kirtland suburb, or was that actually back in the Finger Lakes region? Okay.
I think Colesville is a New York town where
Colesville branch in New York.
Yeah, there were pockets of saints, in the New York area, and so that little pocket basically didn't get to stay in Ohio. They were told, move right along, folks. We want you to go down to Missouri. So they do, and at that point, having received the keys of the gathering, Joseph then is saying, "Okay, we know where we're going to do this, and it's in Missouri." So the saints head down there and start to build, and we know that there will be persecution. But Missouri really has a special place, as we know. Not only were we commanded to gather there, and not only did we start to build up a city, cities there, but it was also designated, as the place of sort of the Garden of Eden where Adam was. Mm-hmm. It's the place where the church will be governed in the millennium. And so a number of important designations were given to Missouri by the prophet that, made it a more special place to gather, even than our home in the West, in Utah. There are some key roles that Missouri will play. Unfortunately, we didn't get to stay very long. And even though we own most of that area in Missouri now as a church, we don't gather there. We had to keep on keeping on.
Yeah, but it's really neat. I mean, last year I had the opportunity I spent time all around this old northwestern Missouri area. I was just there hanging out in the Kansas City area, but actually I was in Caldwell County with my friends. So I saw all these sites. You saw, there's Hans Mill, there is Far West, there is and the temple site there. There was an Adam on Diamond. I don't know if you've ever been there.
Yeah.
It's really cool. And Adam-on-Diamond, of course, is regarded as the place where like the second coming will basically sort of that will be a gathering place.
Yeah.
But when you walk through there with someone who knows the area, they're like, yeah, Joseph Smith gave sermons like on this rock, this boulder to the people, and you see these valleys where things happen, and it's remarkable to get that sense of history. And Missouri is always going to play a huge role in. I mean, Missouri is effectively where we're like supposed to be, quote unquote.
Yeah.
It's like Utah's like where we're in exile, but we're surviving just fine.
I once really irritated a roommate of mine by he was from Utah and big on Utah, and I told him that Utah was a pit stop on the way to Zion, and he did not appreciate that.
It's in some way, it's true though in many ways. I mean, and speaking of Utah, of course, after Missouri, there was the Nauvoo period, but then even that didn't work out. The Saints eventually arrived in the Great Basin. They always call it that, but I feel like the Salt Lake Valley is not part of the Great Basin, but whatever.
Yeah.
But they were in the Wasatch Front. They settled that. And from that time on, the Saints pretty much just gathered in Utah. They pooled together to have strength in numbers to build a society where Zion could be built. And also on top of that, just like in Kirtland, just like how it would have been in Independence and also in Nauvoo, to build temples. That was important.
Right.
And an important part of the Saints gathering in Utah was first the St. George Temple, and then we had Logan, and then Manti, and then Salt Lake Temple, which took 40 years to build. Now, of course, today we don't gather in that same sense. But it's kind of funny because the call was really in effect, I guess, technically until about the early 70s, really. Mm-hmm. At least there was nothing that had been really said to kind of put the kibosh on it. I think by that point the church had grown elsewhere. And the main reason they mentioned this is because by the 70s there were stakes in Latin America, there were stakes in Asia, Australia, Oceania, Europe, of course. We had greater numbers. So like here, Elder McConkie actually said that the revealed words speak of there being congregations of the covenant people of the Lord in every nation, speaking every tongue and among every people when the Lord comes again. The place of gathering for the Mexican saints is in Mexico. The place of gathering for the Guatemalan saints in Guatemala. The place of the gathering for the Brazilian saints is in Brazil. And so it goes throughout the length and the breadth of the holders. And I could go name any place and he'll just say that. And likewise, President Harold B. Lee, who was the president of the church at the time, backed this up about a year later. And he said, in effect, that the pioneering phase of gathering was now over. The gathering is now to be out of the world into the church in every nation. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it served a great purpose, of course, and there's still plenty of Mormons who just want to be in Utah, even from different countries, say, no, my dream is to move to the U.S. and be among the saints in Utah. And if that's your thing, great. That's fine.
And historically, I mean, it played an important role. I mean, if you think about that time, especially the time in Utah, as much as I joked around with my roommate about it, like the fact that we had our own place for an extended period of decades really allowed the church to become a very powerful organization. I mean, under Brigham and subsequent leaders, the church ran everything and became...
And it couldn't be ignored. Yeah. Even as a political body to play ball with the U.S. government.
And we learned how to like supervise everything. Like people usually look at Mormons today and they're impressed by how organized we seem and how much we're able to do. I think that's largely a result of the fact that we lived as a people for a long time, and as a church we have that culture of organizing and getting things done, and and kind of working together as a team. And that's I think that's sort of the awe of Zion in the latter days, is that we have that ability. And had we not had that period of physical gathering, maybe we wouldn't have that culture as a body of saints.
No, I don't think we would. I mean, there are times when I think about how neat it might have been if these saints all over the world had just stayed there and built the church.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't have, because even today, like I went to Iceland a couple of years ago. There's an island off of Iceland that was just smothered with LDS converts from Iceland. And they came and they settled Spanish Fork, Utah, for the most part.
Huh.
The funny story there is because Brigham Young, being, I can't say it any other way, just sort of, culturally ignorant.
Yeah.
He just assumed because Iceland was under the Kingdom of Denmark at the time that Icelanders and Danes were just the same thing. And he'd sent all the Danish converts to Spanish Fork to settle it.
Huh.
And when the Icelanders showed up, he's like, yeah, sure, just go down hang
there.
out with your fellow Danish men.
Oh, that's
whatever.
true.
But the point is, it'd be interesting to see you'd have like these crazy numbers of members everywhere else. Or would we, because this body might have been weaker at the core.
Yeah.
So gathering is very fascinating. And now, of course, we see it. We have 140 dedicated temples, I think, And a temple is, in my opinion, the greatest indicator of the strength of the saints in a particular region.
Yeah.
Because we can have numbers on the rolls, but without stakes to strengthen Zion and be a protection to Zion, and without those members living righteously and doing their things, the temple is like the crowning achievement, so to speak.
Yeah.
To get that.
And it's always been that way.
I mean, I don't want to disparage the Philippines or Chile, but you probably remember when we were both on our missions or so, when the Philippines and Chile have huge numbers of members, but they both had one temple each. And we knew there were problems with retention there. So the apostles, Elders Holland and Oakes, went to these countries and kind of righted the ship. What have we seen since then? The Philippines now has 2 temples, a third under construction. Chile has a second one announced. The work is going forward because the stakes of Zion abroad are being strengthening.
Yeah.
So gather where you are. I don't care if you're lonely in Mongolia. Stay there.
Yep.
All right.
I mean, come visit. We'd love to see you out in the central gathering place, but let's get a temple in Mongolia.
I do wish we had more time so we could talk about the sort of irony of the fact that BYU though is a huge gathering place.
Yeah,
it's the complete opposite of everything that we talk about.
It's kind of like the entire scope of church history. It's a gathering place for your early years, and then you should leave.
Yeah, but a lot of them don't.
Yeah,
we've seen this.
It happens.
Get a visa, marry an American.
Yeah.
And then the problem with that is you don't go back and strengthen your own country.
It's true.
All right. Well, that was kind of a negative note to end on, but I'm okay with it. Bill, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening, everyone, to Lesson 12, The Gathering of My People from the Church History and Doctrine and Covenants Manual. Please find us at thisweekinmormons.com, on iTunes, on Facebook, on the things. Just find us or shoot us an email, contact@thisweekinmormons.com. And we will talk to all of you again. Sunday School Bonanza. Hope wishing you a wonderful Sabbath day.